Hello everyone. Tonight we lay down slowly beside ancient tombs, in a world where the sun was a god, death was a portal, and the greatest terror was not dying, but being forgotten in silence. While the world outside moves quickly, inside everything slows down. Imagine that the air around you smells of dry papyrus, of slowly burning incense. The sound of the night is soft, almost like sand slipping through the fingers of an ancient time. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening to me from now? And what time is it where your night starts? Now, take a deep breath, turn on a dim light, maybe a candle, or just close your eyes if you like. I'll take you there. In ancient Egypt, dying was not an end. It was a process, a ritual, a final exam in several stages, where even the most pious could fail. Imagine living your entire life fearing every little mistake, not because of the police, but because an uncertain eternity watched you with its eyes closed. For the Egyptians, the afterlife was not a place of rest, but a long corridor, full of trials, enigmatic gods, and bright-eyed judges. And at the center of it all were them, the priests, men who lived to serve the gods, but who, deep down, trembled at the thought of their own deaths. Yes, even those who led the ritual were afraid, and perhaps that is why their temples smelled more of fear than faith. But why? Because they knew that the afterlife was not a flowery field with soft harps. It was a labyrinth, a journey, a kind of divine bureaucracy where a single mistake, a single spell misspoken, an offering out of order could throw you straight into the clutches of creatures with the head of a jackal or the mouth of a crocodile. There was no total security, not even for the pious. And that is why, tonight, we will wander together through this sleeping Egypt. We will discover why, even wrapped in gold and chants, the priest feared the crossing. We will laugh softly at their anxiety, perhaps because it reminds us a little of our own. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan to create that soft humming in the background. Or imagine the sound of the wind blowing through the palm trees of the Nile. And let's begin tonight's journey together. Imagine a stone door slowly opening. Behind it, there are no sacred lights. What you find is a cold, silent hall where orders are awaited. There are no smiling deities. There are forms to fill out. The Egyptian afterlife was a place where even the dead had to prove that they were worthy, that they had done the right thing, that they knew every step. If this sounds familiar, perhaps it's because their paradise sometimes resembled a government department, where even those who spent their lives kneeling in hymns could be sent back, not out of malice, but because of a form error. It was as if death required protocol, as if the priest's heart was weighed not only with symbols, but with invisible rules, with judgments that resemble our own, only made by gods with feathers and crocodiles instead of pens. And there was a subtle irony in this. Those who knew most about the rules of the afterlife trembled before them, as if knowing the path made the journey all the more daunting, as if, by understanding the criteria, they felt more clearly the risk of failure. It was not enough to have served the gods. One had to know their names, every password, and say them in the right order. A misplaced silence, a forgotten word, and one's return to earth could come in the form of punishment or oblivion. And to think that all of this began with a simple desire to continue existing. But continuing for them was more complex than living. Continuing meant going through trials, faces, gates, and even after all of this, perhaps, just perhaps, being accepted. Still, between one trial and another, the priests tried to sleep. With their eyes half closed, they muttered spells to themselves, like someone repeating a password before an interview, like someone dreaming of order amidst chaos. And it is in this nocturnal whisper that we follow. Sometimes I imagine an Egyptian priest lying in his tomb, still conscious as if he were just dozing between two worlds, his body covered in linen, his eyes closed but his mind awake, listening to the muffled sounds of the sands outside. And inside, a silence that throbs in his chest. For there, right in the center of their being, was what they feared most. It was not a weapon, nor a failed spell. It was their own heart. For the Egyptians, the heart was not a muscle, but a witness. It was where thoughts were written, intentions, hidden truths that no one saw. And at the end of the journey, it was this small organ that spoke for them, literally. Before the court of Osiris, the heart would be placed on a scale, next to a feather. And this feather was no metaphor. It was the feather of the goddess Mart, a symbol of justice, order, and balance. If the heart was lighter, the soul could follow. But if it weighed more, well, there was a creature waiting. A myth, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, a devourer of souls. Imagine then, this priest, He spent his entire life fasting, praying, learning formulas and incantation. But when he arrived there, in that room where the walls seemed to breathe, it was not his sacred garment that spoke for him. It was what he felt in silence, what he thought to himself, what he desired in secret. The heart could not lie, and this is deeply human, because even today, in the silence of the night, how many of us are not afraid of our own thoughts? How many do not look inside and ask ourselves, am I light enough? Do I carry too many regrets, too many expectations, resentments that weigh more than memory? Perhaps that priest's greatest terror was not a myth, but rather the possibility that he had lived with his heart full of things that he never had the courage to let go of. And in the end, the divine scale was just a mirror, a reflection of what was always there inside, even before death. And it is with this mirror in mind that we move forward, through even darker corridors, where strange shapes begin to appear. The walls, painted millennia ago with pigments of ochre and charcoal, seem to move in the flickering light of an imaginary lamp. And at the end of the corridor, what awaits is not a promise of light, but an open mouth, female, animal, ferocious. There she is, a mitch from which he devours the mouth of the unworthy. For the Egyptians, hell was not a place of fire, it was a non-place. Dissolution, being swallowed by a mit, was not about being punished with pain. It was about disappearing, ceasing to exist, losing even the right to be remembered, an erasure. And the most curious thing is the creature's face, a mix of animals that, alone, inspire fear. But together, they create an absurdity that only the unconscious could invent. An animal with crocodile legs, a lion's belly, and a hippopotamus head. A collage of instincts, a guardian of limbo. She didn't run, she didn't hunt, she just waited. And she slowly chewed away the souls that weren't worthy of continuing. But what if the heart failed due to nervousness? What if the soul, pure until then, made a mistake at the time of the test, like someone who stutters in a decisive interview? The divinity did not judge intention, it judged weights. This is where the silent irony that runs through the entire Egyptian imagination comes in, because even the righteous could be swallowed up, not out of malice, but out of hesitation, out of fear, out of emotional excess. And today, perhaps we understand this fear of disappearing, of no longer being someone, of not having a name remembered, of making a mistake at a crucial moment and seeing everything was built disappear. But for now, you are here. Your name still exists, your dreams too, and the voice that accompanies you is not Amit's. It is only mine, whispering stories in your ears, while the night lulls you with its own mysteries. And if you want to continue, I am ready too. There are more gates ahead, more creatures with soft shapes and all-seeing eyes. Let's go together, slowly. There is still time. Imagine waking up every morning with the weight of the world on your shoulders. And I'm not talking about emails piling up or bills overdue. I'm talking about the duty of keeping the sun going. Literally, for the priests of Egypt, there was no such thing as a guaranteed morning without the right ritual. They woke before dawn, bathed in silence, applied perfumed oil, avoided meat, certain words, and even certain thoughts. All this to please the gods, so that I, the sun god, would have the strength to cross the sky once more. It was a meticulous routine, a sacred ballet. Every gesture was measured, every word was intoned with care, as if the universe were listening, because, for them, it was. The altar had to be clean, the statues had to be washed with milk and rinsed with wine, the offerings had to be fresh, the incense had to be constant. Day after day, the same rituals had to be repeated, in the same order, with the same faith. One mistake, one distraction, and the gates to the afterlife could open prematurely. It's curious to think about this while, on our side of time, we live routines that also seem magical. Brushing our teeth 3 times, checking messages before going to sleep, avoiding certain people, certain streets, certain thoughts, as if a modern ritual protected us from chaos. Perhaps that is why the story of these priests touches us so deeply. Because, like us, they tried to control the uncontrollable. They tried to tame fear with repetition. They tried to deserve tomorrow. And even if tomorrow came, there was still more to do. More chanting, more purification, more promises made to the void. All so as not to slip on the ladder between this world and the next. But even in the midst of so much rigidity, there was beauty, a kind of ancient dance, as if every gesture, even the most banal, was painted with the gold of the sacred. And between one ritual and another, perhaps some tired priest would lean against the cold wall of the temple, sigh in secret and think, is all this enough? Maybe he didn't know the answer. But he kept going, always, because stopping was never an option. Now close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath. Try to imagine the smell of ancient Egypt. Not the smell of dusty streets or market stalls, but the scent of the sacred halls of a temple where eternity was being prepared. It was a thick smell, a mixture of myrrh, frankincense, lotus oils, and cedar resin. It was the scent of divine presence, but also of the human attempt to hide fear. Because there, even the smell said who you were. Priests were not allowed to have an odor, not only for hygiene reasons, but for sacredness. The body had to be neutral, silent, clean. It was completely depilated. Every hair was removed. The armpits were shaved. The feet were washed with herbal infusions. And all this was repeated day after day, as if purity were an invisible garment. The judgment of the dead was not just moral. It was aesthetic, sensory. You were analyzed with the eyes, and also with the noses of the gods. Today, our perfumes are urban rituals, a way of expressing who we are without words. But back then, they were enchantment. Each scent had an intention, a spiritual purpose, and wearing the wrong scent at the wrong time could be more than embarrassing. It could be dangerous. There were secret formulas, mixtures passed down among initiates, expensive oils, sometimes more valuable than gold, delicately applied to the skin, the scalp, the wrists, as if the body were a temple, as if the smell were the password that would open the doors to the afterlife. And deep down, the fear was simple. Fear of being impure, fear of causing repulsion to entities, fear of being rejected not by something said or done, but by something exhaled. How many of us don't worry about this, even without gods lurking around? The insecurity of being noticed, judged, noticed, for something as subtle as our smell. But on that Egyptian night, enveloped by perfumes and prayers, the priest lay down hoping that his presence would be light, that the aroma would say, I was here, I was careful, I was worthy. And while the body rested, the essences continued to act, floating in the still air of the burial chamber, like small requests whispered to eternity. And then, finally dead, the priest discovered that dying was just the beginning. The body lies in its tomb, but the soul awakens in an inverted world, dark, humid, full of sounds that have no origin and shapes that have no name. The Egyptian underworld was not linear. It was an enigma, a map with folds, where each fold hid a test. There were 12 gates, each one guarded by a different creature. There were passwords, secret names, words of power that only worked if spoken with the right intention. One wrong pause, and the door wouldn't open, or worse, it would open the wrong way. The priest, trained in life, needed to remember everything, every formula, every symbol. It was like a labyrinth of lucid dreams where the only compass was knowledge itself. But who guarantees that memory works after death? Imagine yourself walking through a dark library. The floor is made of hot sand. The ceiling is endless. Each step reveals a new dilemma. A new sphinx with golden eyes stares at you, waiting for the answer you have studied your entire life to give. But there, in the absolute silence, even knowledge seems to tremble. And this is where the fear of forgetting reveals itself. Not forgetting those who are left behind, but forgetting yourself, forgetting what to say, forgetting who you were, forgetting why you are there. It's a feeling that perhaps accompanies us too. That moment when everything depends on a word, a memory, a detail, and the mind fails. How many times have we felt like this, even in life, in white corridors of hospitals or offices, looking for the right password? For the Egyptians, the underworld was just that, a test of memory, faith, and self-control. A place where mistakes were punished not with pain, but with a new beginning. Where every failure made you come back and try again. So dying was easy, but getting through was a feat, a personal miracle. And those who succeeded became eternal, not through power, but through persistence. And as we move, ever so slowly, through these nocturnal images, perhaps we can imagine that the journey of the Egyptian soul was not so different from our own. One step at a time, one name remembered, one intention spoken in a low voice, and sometimes the simple will to continue. Silence. Not even the sound of the wind crosses this place. Only the presence of something that has no name, but weighs heavily on the shoulders. Here, on the final frontier of the beyond, there are no more gates, no more creatures with sharp teeth. The final test has no form, for what awaits is oblivion. For the priest, more than being judged, more than being devoured or lost in the underworld, the greatest fear was disappearing, being a name without a voice, a body without prayer, a soul without an altar. They knew that eternity was not just a matter of spiritual destiny, but of continuous remembrance. One had to be named, to be prayed for, to have someone to light a candle, leave a loaf of bread, murmur a prayer. Only then could the soul continue to exist. Oblivion was absolute exile. And that is why Egyptian tombs were so meticulously decorated. Because they were not just tombs. They were eternal biographies. There were written their deeds, their families, their favorite gods, even their favorite foods, recorded on stone walls. All so that, when read, even by a stranger, the soul would remember, I exist. And how many times have we not also wished for this? That someone would know who we were. That, even later, our name would still float in some memory, at some Sunday dinner, in some distracted comment. That someone would say, he liked old things, silences, and that's it. We are no longer completely gone. It was this continuity that the priests sought, not glory, but permanence. A kind of soft echo, like the sound of water running in the background. A name that resonates, even if no one knows for sure whose name it was anymore. And in the end, when all the evidence had been overcome and the judgment had been passed, there was one last wish, not for gold, not for power, but for someone at some future time to say his name in a low voice. That was all, one name, and then silence. And here, in the faint heat of the night, maybe we can do that too. Remember, even without knowing, whisper erased names, just to make sure no one is completely erased. And as the night deepens, we move on. There are still mysteries waiting for us, and confessions being told very carefully. Now imagine a vast hall, with columns so tall that they disappear into the shadows. In the center, a scale. In front, Osiris, motionless as ancient stone. Around him, other gods, also motionless, but attentive. And you, standing before them, without disguise, only with your words. The soul's next step was to recite what they called negative confessions. There were 40 sentences, each one a ceremonial denial of a moral wrong. I have not killed. I have not stolen. I have not cheated. I have not committed adultery. I have not lied about grain or falsified weights. I have not been cruel to animals. I have not caused unnecessary tears. 40 times, and each sentence needed to be said clearly, with certainty, without hesitation, as if the soul was cleansing itself with words. There was no room for doubt. One mistake, one silence, one stutter, and everything could fall apart. It is a striking image, because, once again, it is not just about great sins, but about small gestures, small intentions. It was as if Egyptian justice was more concerned with the everyday soul than with great heroes. And the fear was forgetting one of them, changing the order, declaring by mistake that one did something that one did not do. The fear was stumbling over one's own words, like someone stepping on quicksand at the most solemn moment of the crossing. Even worse, what if it was a lie? If you said, I didn't steal, but deep down, you knew that at some point, you took something that wasn't yours. Confession was a ritual, but it was also a mirror. And that is why so many people trembled when repeating it. Because repeating is remembering. It is revisiting. It is facing oneself calmly, without rushing, and accepting. Today, we don't have those 40 phrases, but perhaps we have others. Little promises that we repeat silently before going to sleep. I did my best. I tried to be fair. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Simple phrases that help us rest. And while the Egyptian gods listened attentively, the priest spoke to them one by one, in a low but firm voice, as if he knew he didn't need to be perfect, just truthful. And with the last sentence said, a light breath passed, as if the air from beyond accepted him, and then he could move on. But even those admitted could stumble over the next detail, because eternity in Egypt also depended on an attentive scribe, and not all of them were. Now imagine the following. You devoted your entire life to a belief. Each morning began with ablution. Each evening ended with prayers. You memorized the names of the gods, made offerings at moonrise, cherished every symbol, every sacred word as if they were threads that bound you eternity. And then he dies, but you die in peace, because your body has been mummified. Your tomb has been prepared with all the offering. There is food, there are perfumes, there are small statues that will work for you in the afterlife. And next to your body lies the most important, your book of the dead. But you don't see, you don't touch, you don't read. It's there, rolled up like papyrus, painted with natural dyes on a handmade parchment, written by hand, by someone who was perhaps distracted. Someone who, while writing the spells that you should recite in the afterlife, heard the noise of the market outside, thought about debts, thought about his own death. Or maybe he just got tired and changed a line, and nobody noticed. You walk through the gates of the underworld with courage. You recite the first spells by heart. Everything seems to work. The doors open, the creatures retreat, the secret names echo on the walls. You smile. You believe you can do it, but at the 8th gate, Silence. You seek enchantment, but it is not there. The words that should be there are not there, or they are wrong, mixed up, and it is not your fault. But eternity does not understand that. The gods do not accept human justification. And there, standing still, not knowing how to go on, the soul begins to wander, to repeat paths, to go back, or worse, to fall into parallel worlds, where nameless things drag the forgotten through endless corridors. In some cases, the wrong spell doesn't open the door, but opens another. Unwanted portals, where the soul encounters lesser entity, wandering spirits, confusion, disorientation. It is like a dream where you try to run, but your feet do not move, or when you speak, but no one understands your language, and there is no one to ask for help, because the scribe was left behind, and now his only legacy is what was written, or poorly written. This fear was so real that some families paid 3 or 4 different scribes to make cross copies. They had them proofread letter by letter, and still they slept with doubts, because eternity has no second copy, and sometimes the error of a single line can make you disappear in silence. It is the kind of anguish that reminds us of how much we trust the invisible to others, the system that records our medical history, the bank that stores our name, the school that archives our trajectory. What if, through carelessness, they write it wrong? Today, it is corrected, but in Egyptian cosmology, there was no editing after death, and perhaps that is why the priests, even the most devout, did not fully trust. That is why they engraved spells on the walls. That is why they mummified amulets with prayers of safety. That is why long sighs echoed in the burial chambers. A fear that was not said out loud, but remained there, trapped between the folds of the linen, between the fingers that crossed the chest of the dead, as if apologizing for something that had not even happened yet. And now that we have gone through this fear together, we can move on, because, as we will see, sometimes, the responsibility of making tomorrow happen fell on those who stayed behind, and that was also a form of love and of faith. While you sleep, there are things that continue. Time, for example, the stars, the tides. And for the ancient Egyptians, there was also another night watch, that of the priests, because, for them, the sun did not rise automatically. I, the sun god, had to cross the underworld every night, facing monsters and darkness. And this journey was not symbolic, it was real. The sun really struggled to be reborn, and sometimes it almost didn't make it. That was why, even when the city slept, the temples did not fall silent. Deep inside, men with shaved heads, covered in light robes, chanted songs that echoed like embalmed prayers. Their voices, low and continuous, were like a thread that pulled the sun back from the abyss. They lit oil lamps, they poured milk over statues, they burned myrrh with precision, and all this not out of superstition, but out of a deep sense of responsibility. If I did not return, the darkness would be eternal. And if you think that's an exaggeration, think about the times you couldn't sleep because you were afraid of the next day. Think about that void between 2 and 4 in the morning, when your body wants to rest, but your mind is on guard. It's almost as if, inside us, there's also a temple lit up, trying to make sure that something comes back, that something continues. For the priests, every night was a battle, invisible, but real. And there was a specific moment when they stopped, an instant when they listened to the silence, and then they waited. The first ray of light appearing on the horizon was more than a natural phenomenon. It was a confirmation, a relief, a rebirth, and there were restrained smiles among those who had been watching, as if to say, we have done it again. It's nice to imagine that, while the people slept, someone watched the sun. While the city rested, someone kept the fire burning. While darkness seemed to dominate everything, there were those who sang, just to make sure the light returned. And perhaps, as you listen to this now, with the sound low in the room, the soft light filtering through your eyelids, you too will feel that you are not alone. That, even while you sleep, there are things moving, invisible care, ancestral rhythms, and that the simple act of closing your eyes is also a kind of faith. And so, let's go together, because even in eternity, a rotten tooth could be a serious problem. Imagine the discomfort of a toothache that lasts for days. Now, imagine that discomfort being interpreted as a sign of impurity, not just a physical discomfort, but an indication that your soul maybe isn't so clean after all. In ancient Egypt, health and spirituality were not separate. A healthy body was a reflection of a balanced soul. And even in the afterlife, certain details of the body still mattered, especially the teeth. The priests knew this. They knew that the mouth was a direct channel to the sacred. Suns, spells, and confessions passed through it. It was through the mouth that the dead would pronounce the names of the gods. the secret passwords of the underworld, the incantations that would open the gates of eternity. But what if the mouth was sick? An inflamed tooth, dark gums, bad breath. All of this was viewed with suspicion, because, according to their beliefs, the odor from the mouth could contaminate rituals, and after death, it could compromise judgment. Many priests sought to avoid this fate by taking extreme care. They chewed leaves with antiseptic properties, they used scented resin, and when the tooth was already compromised, they resorted to onion extracts, myrrh, or even scrapings with copper blades. But it wasn't always possible. Time, age, the hardness of the food, all left their mark. And so, there was the dead man. His body was embalmed, his heart was light, his confession raised. But a hidden cavity could be interpreted as a flaw, as impurity, as spiritual neglect. It wasn't just vanity, it was symbolic, because the body for the Egyptians was a reflection of the inner order. If something was rotting inside, perhaps the soul was also compromised. It's funny to think about that today. How many times have we felt that small physical discomforts affect us much more than they should? A discomfort that changes our mood, a symptom that generates fear, a silent pain that corrodes the tranquility of our soul. For the Egyptians, it was no different, and perhaps deep down, we all share this fear. The fear that a small, almost invisible flaw could bring something big crashing down. But there is also something beautiful in this, because this fear reveals care, attention, the attempt to be whole, even in the smallest parts, to be worthy, even in the details. And then, with his teeth clean, his body perfumed, and his heart at peace, the priest would follow. Because the soul in Egypt was not just one, it was a whole, and all the parts needed to be awake, or, curiously enough, well rested. In the world of the living, it is already difficult to keep the mind and body in harmony. Now imagine carrying not one, but several versions of yourself, several souls, each with a function, each with its own needs, and all, in a certain way, wanting rest. For the Egyptians, the soul was composed of multiple parts, ka, ba, akh, ren, shirt. Each one represented an aspect of the being. The ka was the vital energy, the ba was the personality that could travel, the akh was the transfigured form that shone among the gods, ren was the eternal name, and shirt, the shadow. Each one needed to be in balance. Each one had its own role in the crossing to the beyond, but there was an unspoken rule. If one failed, they all failed. And like any traveler, even souls needed to rest. Ka, for example, needed food and drink. Ba needed freedom. He would go out at night, hover over beloved bodies, visit temples, fly on the desert breeze. But if you were restless, if you didn't sleep well, you could get lost. And this, for the priests, was frightening, because it was not enough to take care of the physical body. It was necessary to create conditions so that all versions of the soul would feel safe. And this involved the tomb, the rituals, the objects left nearby, the nocturnal enchantment. It's like an internal team, a set of selves that needed to be in tune. And all of this was orchestrated for a greater purpose, continuity, permanence. And isn't it the same with us? How many times have we felt fragmented? Part of us wants to move on, another hesitates. One is tired, another is anxious. One remembers, another tries to forget. And all of us, at some level, need care, listening, pausing. In Egypt, sleep was seen as a close relative of death, but also as a rehearsal, a time when the parts of the soul met, reorganized themselves, rested. So before going to sleep, many priests would recite incantations, not to the gods, but to themselves, so that their parts would recognize each other, so that the ba would return from its travels, so that the ka would feed on dreams, so that the akh would shine in peace. It's a comforting thought, knowing that, even millennia ago, it was already understood that human beings are multiple, that rest is not just physical, that there are parts of us that also need a hug, silence, a safe space. And so, with all the souls gathered together, aligned like notes in a forgotten melody, the priest could proceed, or at least try, because not even mummification guaranteed everything. Sometimes it was the embalmer who had slept too little, or drunk too much. And then the error was another, more physical, and equally disastrous. The sweet smell of hot resin still hung in the air. The room was cold, carved into the rock, silent. Only the sound of bandages being wound, of bronze pincers scraping the inside of an empty skull. This was where the body found its second form, but not always in the right way. For the Egyptians, mummification was a sacred ritual, a delicate art that required precision. It was more than preserving the body. It was preparing a home for the soul, a sacred envelope that needed to be intact, harmonious, and recognizable. But the embalmer was human, and humans get tired, they get distracted, they get frustrated. Some were dedicated, almost priestly. Others, poorly paid workers in dark corridors, where dozens of bodies awaited the same fate. And sometimes, the error happened. A switched nose, a dislocated eye, organs stored in the wrong urn, or in more dramatic cases, pieces of different people's bodies being sewn into the same body. The soul, upon waking up, did not recognize it. It was like waking up in a body that was not yours, in a strange face, with hands that did not remember what they had touched in life. And that caused confusion. In the final judgment, the gods looked at the whole, and if the body was flawed, the soul could be rejected. It was like presenting a passport with the wrong photo. One small mistake, and it nullified everything. To avoid this, the richest people hired famous embalmers. They paid for extra layers of linen, imported oils, and rare resin, all to ensure that, upon awakening, their bodies would be a faithful reflection of their experiences. But wealth did not always prevent mistakes, because the process was long. It could take up to 70 days, and a distraction in the 21st day could jeopardize the rest. It's sad to think about. After everything, after a life lived with care, after the ritual, the chants, the fast, to be barred from eternity because someone forgot a spell, or got the heart in the wrong position, and at the same time, it is deeply human. How many times do we depend on others to be seen? How many times do our image, our history, our destiny, remain in the hands of others? In that silent chamber, the priest's body lay, perhaps with his nose slightly crooked, perhaps with his arms crossed the wrong way, but deep down, there was still a hope that the gods would understand, that, despite the flaws, there would be forgiveness. And if that's true, then maybe there's still time, because the greatest punishment, for some, was not to miss the spell, nor to fail in judgment. It was to come back, to reincarnate, and sometimes, as something no one wanted to be. The sun finally breaks the horizon. The souls that manage to cross the underworld breathe a sigh of relief. But not all of them. Some are returned. They are reincarnated, not as warriors, nor as nobles, nor even as priests, but like tax clerks. Yes, that was one of the possible punishments for those who failed the final judgment, returning to Earth with a tiring task, a bureaucratic life, full of bills, calculations, and worst of all, being hated by everyone. In the Egyptian imagination, the tax collector was not just an official. He was someone who carried the weight of the system on his shoulders, who dealt with complaints, accusations, and murmurs from villagers, who visited homes where food was scarce and patience even less. It was, at the same time, a symbol of order and a target of contempt, returning as a scribeman living among numbers, papyrus scrolls, endless records. And unlike the priestly glory, there was no reverence, only tolerance. This view of reincarnation as punishment reflected a deep Egyptian sense that eternity had to be earned, and if it wasn't, then the return to the world was educational. Instead of being swallowed by monsters, one's destiny was to live among receipts and tables, under the scorching desert sun. It wasn't violent, it was ironic, and it's curious to realize this, because to this day, there's something in us that fears boredom, repetition, the feeling of being stuck in soulless routines, in jobs that don't feed the spirit, as if, secretly, we still fear reincarnating, in a place where we are not seen. The punishment, then, was not pain, it was insignificance. But perhaps this tells us something bigger, because the Egyptians did not despise work. What they feared was living without meaning, repeating gestures, writing names, collecting tribute, without memory, without affection, without symbol. And deep down, isn't that what we all want most? That even our small tasks have some meaning, that even when we feel out of form, we are connected to something bigger. So being reincarnated as a tax clerk was not just a punishment. It was a reminder, a push to find meaning in things before it is too late, so that when the time comes, we will not have to return to this world for lack of meaning. But there was still another choice. For some priests, the ideal eternity was neither judgment nor glory. It was dissolution, a serene surrender, as if all they wanted was to become part of the current and simply flow, like the Nile, always going, always returning, unnoticed, but always essential. And then, among so many paths, tests and rituals, there were those who chose not to follow. They did not want golden thrones in the afterlife, nor celestial garden, nor eternal joy among the gods. They wanted to disappear gently into the Nile, not out of desperation, but out of wisdom, For some priests, true peace was not found in personal eternity. It was found in dissolution, in the silent return to what had always existed, being carried along by the river's current, mixing with the water, the mud, the roots of the palm trees that line the banks, ceasing to be someone, and in doing so, becoming part of everything. It was a delicate sight, almost poetic. Cremation rites were rare in Egypt, but there are records of requests for ashes to be offered to the Nile, or for special amulets containing part of the spirit to be deposited in the riverbed during floods. Because the Nile was not just water. It was divinity. It was mother. It was womb. It was beginning and end. It fed the fields, carried the boats, kept secrets. And to return to it was a gesture of cosmic humility. It's nice to imagine that, after so much effort to keep the soul intact, to cross the underworld, to resist judgment, the final choice is to rest, to let go, to allow oneself to disappear without fear, not as punishment, but as fulfillment. And that resonates deeply with us. How many times have we not felt tired of having to be someone all the time, of having to maintain an identity, a role, a name, and deep down, we just want to flow, like water, like silence, like time that does not require a response. To become part of the Nile was, in a sense, to return to the original state, before the name, before the function, before the division between body and soul. It was to be liquid memory. And maybe now, at this point in the night, this image touches something inside you too. The sound of water running slowly, a boat disappearing on the horizon. No rush, no fear, just rest. And so, with this image of serene dissolution, our journey also ends for now. But if this story touched something inside you, well, there's plenty more where that came from. I'll be here, whispering memories of the past into your quiet nights. Whenever you need me, sleep well. And may the Nile of dreams take you lightly, to where words no longer need to be said.